Hey, howdy warriors. It's week 3. Can you believe it? It's almost 20% of the way through the semester. I told you it would go fast. So, hang on. Here we go with our first lecture this week that I'm doing. For those of you who have me in writing class, then I'm going to do a lecture for that just as soon as we're done with this one. All right. So we're in Managing Maintenance, Organizations, and People, 3310. We're in week 3. We're going to talk about the skills approach. Okay. Last week we talked about traits. Now we're going to talk about skills. Here's your subject headings. We've got the skills approach description, a 3-skill approach, and a skills model. So we're studying 2 different versions of the skills approach. And we're going to talk about their strengths and criticisms, and then I just have a few notes for you for this week's project. All right. Let's talk about the skills approach. It's similar to the trait approach. It's still just focused on the leader. We haven't moved into any theories about the workplace or the team, the leader and the follower, that sort of thing. We will be moving into that pretty soon. But for now, we're still focused on just the leader. Okay. So what the skills approach does is it looks for the knowledge and abilities of an effective leader. If you've ever filled out or created a job description, you may have been asked to do some KSAs. That's the knowledge, skills, and abilities that describe a successful candidate for a particular job. So we're right in line with that. And I suspect that that's based on some research done from Skills Approach, since that same language is showing up here. So the first published work on Skills Approach was in 1955 in a Harvard Business Review article. Remember, prior to that, trait approach was the dominant approach to looking at what makes a great leader. In the 1940s, possibly tied into the end of World War II, we start to look for some other ways to describe that. The trait approach is sort of the Superman leader. If you've got these traits, you're going to be great. That's what we're looking for, and you'll succeed in every way, and in every situation. Started to realize that wasn't really the case. So in the 50s, 40s, but then in the mid-50s is when we first start seeing published papers on research on the topic. And remember, we're studying researched ideas in this class. We're not just coming up with our own opinions or reading a book that's based on opinion. Every one of these chapters is based on lots and lots of research, so that's a good way for us to go. What the skills approach did was it sought to find a better approach than traits by defining skills that could be learned, right? Traits you're born with, skills you can learn. The topic was revived in the early 1990s with the Department of Defense funded study of over 1,800 Army officers. So that's the second study that we're going to take a look at. The first one is based on this guy Katz, who wrote the Harvard Business Review article. Okay, so the goal of the DoD study was to define necessary skills for successful leadership. All right, so let's talk about the 3-skill approach. Katz's version is a little simpler than the DoD version. Katz suggested leadership could be boiled down into 3 personal skills: the technical skill, the human skill, and the conceptual skill. Katz argued that skills are what leaders can accomplish versus who leaders are as traits. So in skills, it's what can we do with the skills we have. With traits, it's just who are you? Who were you born as? All right. Unlike traits, skills are more easily acquired through training and personal development. All right. So Katz has the technical side. I think we're all probably familiar with this one, right? It's competency in a technical area. It's manual competencies. Can you put it together? Can you rivet it? Can you cut it? Can you build it? Can you fabricate it? Can you install it? Right? Can you inspect it? Navigating regulatory issues might be another kind of technical area where someone can have competency as a technical competency, right? Not everybody's good at that, so that's an area where you could be competent and rise above the people around you as far as the leadership roles go. So then there's working with or sometimes around the company bureaucracy, right? There's certain skills in that. There's some people who can get things done just because they have skill in working the system. All right, so you could pretty much define a technical skill as any skill that plays an essential role in getting things done in the organization, right? All right, so I want you to think back to Chapter 1 real quick and try and apply technical skill to one of the power structures that we studied in Chapter 1. If you've got a If you want to push pause and think about it, great, but here's my answer. I think it most closely aligns to expert power, right? You're an expert at a task or a series of tasks. That means you've got technical competency in that area. One part of the 3-skill approach. All right, let's talk about the human skills. Not everybody has this one. Knowing how to work with people. That's someone who can pull a team together from a group of individuals. Don't forget, every team is made up of individual people. Each one of those people brings their own assets and their own liabilities to that team. So someone who's really good with working with people is going to be able to get that team all rowing in the same direction. One way you do that is create an atmosphere of trust, right? And then also that leader who's got the human skill needs to be able to understand individual motivations and needs. That's how you get person A may be motivated by one thing, person B may be motivated by another. You got to get them both focused on the organizational task at hand, even if you have to find different ways to motivate them. Or you could use coercive power and just threaten to fire them. But I think most people in our classes prefer to work with someone who is good at working with people. It's a much better way to spend the day, and you spend a lot of time with the people you work with. So having someone in a leadership position who's good at that is definitely an asset. So you use this skill to move the organizational goals forward. It's a very complex idea summed up in a short little bullet point there. Okay. Referent power is what I would consider to be the most closely connected power that we studied in Chapter 1. Because for the most part, if you're good at working with people, people are probably going to like you or at least respect you. I could imagine a case where someone might be really good at working with people, but no one really likes them. That person might be better at manipulating people than working with them. So let's look at this from the positive side and assume that if you know how to work with people, that also makes you someone who is who's granted referent power by the rest of the crew. They give you power because they like working with you. They like you as a leader. Okay. Conceptual skill. This one's a little more conceptual. It's not quite as tangible as your technical skill or even your people skills. This is the ability to work with ideas and concepts. And this kind of a person is going to be comfortable with working with hypotheticals and abstractions. We've seen in some of the discussions where people talk about how they want to get every little piece of information before they make a decision. They're afraid to or nervous about making the wrong decision, so therefore they want to kind of sit on it. They're long processors. They want to make sure they understand every little facet. That's not a bad thing, right? We need people on the crew who are like that. But the conceptual leader, the leader with conceptual skill, is going to be okay coming to conclusions before they have all the answers. That doesn't mean they're going to act on those conclusions yet, but this is how you plan ahead. This is kind of like playing chess, right? You're looking 3-4 moves ahead. Okay. They can function without always having all the information. Just touched on that. And they deal largely in theory and what-if possibilities. Okay. You can see how this is an important skill to have. Strong conceptual skills are valuable when facing rapid change. Just look at what happened with COVID-19 in the airline industry. Some airlines have rapidly adapted, came up with plans quickly. No, this wasn't in anyone's playbook, right? They had to come up with ideas fast. Sometimes you have to commit to some ideas before you have all the information. So a good, strong conceptual thinker is going to be a tremendous asset to a company when it comes to that. That person, the closest I could think of was information power off the list in Chapter 1. It's a little bit different interpretation than Chapter 1 has, but it means that they are good with information. They can connect things up. They can take a few bits of information and they can extrapolate and see where things are going. They can spot trends before anybody else. These are things that are tremendous assets to an organization. Now, I want to take a little bit of a minute to talk about how the 3 types of power that I've tied this back to in Chapter 1, none of those have to do with actually being in a management position, right? These the manager positions were the oh boy, let's see if I have these memorized. I just looked at the chart. The coercive power, reward power, and position power. those are the things that someone who's, walks around with a badge that says manager have. The three things I've noticed or talked about here or tied them into in chapter 1 are not that position power, right? Anyone in an organization can express these three skills. I think that's very interesting that Cass's study kind of points to that, because we've been talking in this class so far about the difference between management and leadership. So you can be a leader on your crew without having the badge that says manager or crew chief, and operate in all of these competencies. So I just think that's kind of super interesting. Okay. That's not in the textbook. That's why we have lecture. Okay. So the need for these skills are going to vary at different levels of the organization. Okay. So if you're not super strong in conceptual skill, but you're just entering your leadership career, that's okay. You're going to have time to develop that. So let's look at that. You might be in the supervisory management position or role right now. It means you need to have a lot of technical skill, right? You got to know how whatever it is works, how you make the widgets. You've got to have a lot of human skill to organize the team and get things done. And a little conceptual skill is good, but you're generally not going to run into those big direction-changing questions that the company or the organization might be facing at that level. Oops, wrong way. You go to the middle management, and look at this. You're going to have to be good at all of them. Technical, human, and conceptual. You're being relied on more to give your opinion. You're still not making the final decisions, but you're being polled and talked to when the company faces some change as to how you might contribute to that. So that's your conceptual skill set kicks up at that point. And very interestingly, the top management, really the technical skills are important. They need to understand what's going on. They don't necessarily have to know, what kind of rivet goes in what hole based on strengths and structural, that kind of stuff. It's not as important as their ability to use human interaction and have conceptual skills. I kind of think of, I used to watch way back in the day, first couple of seasons of American Idol, I will confess. And, everyone loved to hate Simon Cowell, and they'd say, well, you can't sing, so what do you know? And he says, I don't have to know how to sing. I to be able to critique your singing. So, similar, maybe, I don't know. Just popped into my head, thought I'd share that. All right. Now, let's talk about the DoD-funded study that was done in the early 1990s. It was designed to ask a lot of questions, and therefore, it's a lot more complicated than the 3 skills model. So some of the questions they had were, why are some leaders good problem solvers? What skills do high-performing leaders use effectively? What individual attributes are important? How does your career path influence these skills? What about environmental influences? Since they asked so many questions in a study, there's going to have to be a lot of data looked at so that they can get to all of those questions. That's pretty ambitious. And I'm not sure how thick the study is, but I would suspect that it's at least a few ring biters full of information. Okay, once it's all put together. Sometimes called the capability model. Just a side note. Okay, study found correlations between knowledge and skills and high performance and leadership. Remember, most legit studies at best will say that we find correlation between A and how it might affect B. Very rarely will a legitimate study come out and say A makes B happen, especially in more complex situations, right? And most things in this world are not binary. They're not A or B as far as 2 decisions. So just stick that in your head and remember that you can correlate something that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to happen every time. That's definitely true in the case of this complex skills model. Okay, so the model also demonstrated that these skills could be developed over time. And again, this is their research showed. It wasn't just their idea, and they went about reverse engineering a solution. This was what the research showed. So that you can develop skills over time through both education and experience. So this is a military study, so that makes me think of, I've not served in the military, so maybe this isn't really a thing. Maybe it's just my perception. But I think of when it comes to education, I think of the newly minted officer fresh out of officer school who has a lot of knowledge. They've studied a lot. and then they're handed their leadership position. They have a lot to contribute. Okay, I'm not saying they don't, but they don't have the experience, right? Then I picture the sergeant or the career enlisted soldier who has the experience. And if that person who's highly educated doesn't listen to that person who has a lot of experience, well, then they're gonna find ways to get their own experience, right? And that's how we learn. And experience is another way of saying that you make a lot of mistakes, because that's where the learning happens usually. All right. So this model identifies 5 components, and each of the components has several subsections. I'm not going to dive too deep into the subsections. I want you to read about it in the book. Okay, spend some time looking at these subsections. I'm just going to identify them. Okay, but the main 5 components are competencies, individual attributes, leadership outcomes, career experiences, and environmental influences. Okay, let's talk a little bit about each of those individually and some of their subcomponents. Competencies. You've got problem-solving skill is a competency, right? That's something you're either good at or not, but it is something that you can get better at over time. So that's the ability to creatively address novel, ill-defined problems. There's a great list in the textbook about going through that process. I want you to spend more than a little time taking a look at that. If I went over every one of these subsets in detail, this would be about an hour-long lecture, and I don't think you guys want that. So please spend some time in the textbook looking at that. It's a really good study of how you can move through problem-solving skills step by step and find ways to work on those and get better at them. Okay, social judgment skills. We've talked about this a little bit already today. This is your ability to work with people, right? The capacity to understand people and social systems. And then he breaks that down even further into perspective, perceptive, and performance. That's perspective, that's understanding people's motivations again. Perceptive, their needs, what people need around you. And then performance is just managing that performance, becoming a high performer. All right. The knowledge competency. That's the accumulation of information and the mental structures used to organize it. There's a thing when you're developing courses called Bloom's taxonomy. Bloom is an educational researcher who said, you know what, there's really multiple levels of understanding something, right? Understanding is not the first step. First, there's knowledge. You got to know about it, right? I know that the sun comes up in the morning, all right? Then there's understanding. The sun comes up in the morning, not because it's moving, but because we're spinning on the Earth's axis. So it looks like it's coming up. And then there's about 3 or 4 more levels above that where you go from understanding, and then you're able to draw conclusions from partial sets of information, and then you're able to design, action plans based on your complete and total understanding of an idea or a concept. So Bloom's taxonomy is very useful in understanding what this means when there's accumulation of knowledge and the mental structures used to organize it. It's not enough to know stuff. You also have to know how it relates. Okay. Individual attributes. General cognitive ability, you might call this your IQ, right? This is your overall intelligence. It grows with age as the brain develops. This is a biologic function. And then in your much later years, it can actually start to decline. So this is what we think of when we think of your IQ, your ability to have general cognitive ability. Okay. Crystallized cognitive ability. That's ideas and mental abilities people learn through experience, right? So experience teaches you. This is why practicing failure is important. Okay, again, in some of the writings so far, I've seen a few folks talk about how they're a little bit afraid to make a call on something. They want to have every possible bit of information they can, and then they still kind of second guess themselves. Guys, people, folks, it's because you need to be comfortable with failing, especially in this environment, right? You're in school. This is a great place to make some mistakes. Okay, I want to encourage you to make some mistakes. When I was teaching in the A&P school, first semester students seemed to be terrified to make a mistake. It's okay, right? You're in school. You're paying to be in an environment where you can make mistakes, and then learn from them. Okay, it's really important. that you get that. I just want to make sure, and I'll probably talk about that a bunch. It's one of my sort of passionate areas. I think we're all way too afraid to fail. It's okay. Like, unless the consequences are, death or at work. Yeah, I get it. You don't want to fail at work. But in life in general, it's okay to fail, folks. That's where you learn. That's where the learning happens. Okay, motivations. You need to have the studies demonstrated that a willingness to engage was vital for your motivation. A willingness to be dominant. That doesn't mean like in a bad way. What it means is to exert influence. You have to be willing to exert influence. If you're not willing to exert influence, that's going to challenge you as a leader. It's going to make it pretty hard for you to lead. You also have to have a very well-developed sense of social good, in this case, or in the workplace example of your organization. Okay, you've got to care that your organization is going to succeed. You need it. You need good outcomes, and that's going to help you be a better leader. One more, and that's personality. So your personality can help, or sometimes, hopefully not, inhibit you from with coping with complex organizational situations. Right? Some people sort of naturally learn how to roll with the punches. Right? They're good at dealing with unexpected change. They like it. Some people aren't. But that's a skill. Remember, it's a skill, so you can develop it. There are ways to work on that. All right. The next large topic in the skills model was leadership outcomes. First one is effective problem solving. So this is one of the most significant factors in effective leadership, right? As a leader, you're always going to have people coming to you, always, constantly, with their problems. And looking to you to help them solve it or navigate it or find a way, through it. If the solutions you propose aren't very effective, your leadership career is not going to be very long. Okay, so finding ways to be effective in your problem solving is very key. One of the highest correlations to successful leaders. So it means you create solutions that are logical, effective, unique. Go beyond the given information, right? Crystallized cognition comes back again. The ability to take little bits of information and put it together into, connect it up in ways that you may not otherwise see by looking at the individual parts. Okay. Your performance, obviously, people who over time get the job done, those people are going to tend to be our better leaders. That's a pretty simple concept. All right. Career experiences. This is an area where life will be your teacher, right? I had a boss one time that said every time you messed up, he called it paying tuition in the school of hard knocks. You walk away a little bruised, but you learn something from the experience, and you don't do it again. So careers that are stuck in low challenge environments do not really enhance the necessary skills. So while it might be comfortable, it's not going to sharpen you as a leader. It's not going to challenge you. Varied experiences are going to grow good leaders as they gain experience dealing with novel issues. When we say novel issues, we mean things that you haven't dealt with before, things that there's not an answer to in a manual or in a policy guide. The people who in their career have had to deal with that a lot more often are on a faster track to becoming an effective leader. All right, and also progressively more complex challenges are most effective. You don't want to take a brand new leader and throw an incredibly insane complex problem at them because they're probably not ready for it. Okay, so like if you're trying to get in shape, you start lifting weights. You don't start out with a 200-pound dumbbell. You got to work your way up to it. So the same thing here. Progressively more complex challenges will sharpen a leader and get them moving in the right direction. Also, and sometimes people try to avoid this if they can, but careers that require the person to deal with more people are going to lead to positive outcomes in their leadership journey. Okay, this goes all the way back to working retail, right? When you're maybe a teenager or a young person in your 20s, those kind of jobs, right? That you look back on and go, oh, how did I ever do that? Look at it this way: they're actually really good for your leadership skills. More times you have to deal with people in your career and in your job, the better leader you're going to be on the end. That's what the research shows. Okay. And then finally, environmental influences. So there's internal and external factors that are beyond your control. Okay, things that you don't have any control over, but that your ability to successfully overcome them are going to, or maybe sometimes not, right? We do learn through failing. But the more you are exposed to them, the more you have to deal with them, the better leader you're ultimately going to be. So it's some internal examples. Your facilities, right? You don't ever have the right tool. The roof leaks, whatever. Your team capabilities. If you've got a bunch of workplace politics you have to get around, dealing with that is going to help you. And then maybe the communication culture and all kinds of other things you can think of. External examples, the economy, right? Right now, that's a big challenge that you don't have control over ultimately, but as a leader, you're going to have to deal with. Politics, right? A vote can go one way and your industry goes up, and a vote goes another way, it goes down. I promise we wouldn't talk about politics, but that's specific to external environmental influences. All right, so maybe social issues, same thing, and a big one, natural disasters, right? Your hangar could get turned inside out by a hurricane, and that's going to be a challenge. Working through that challenge and making your way to the other end ultimately is going to make you a better leader, right? Next time you face a big challenge, you're going to be like, oh, this is no big deal. I rebuilt the company after that big hurricane. So natural disasters are a great example of external influences. Okay, so working through these issues with positive results is going to correlate to more effective leaders. All right, let's talk about strengths and criticisms of the skills approach. Strengths. It's a leader-centered model that stresses personal development of a defined set of skills. It lets us focus just on the leader. That is a strength. We'll also find later that it's criticism as well. Depends on which way you're looking at it. So research shows how different skills are necessary at different levels of leadership. That's something we got here that we did not get in the traits approach. Traits just says blanket, if you've got these traits, you're going to do fine. The skills approach says, well, here you need these skills, and maybe somewhere else you need a different set of skills. So that's nice to see. As the first we see of that, we're definitely going to see a lot more of that thinking as we move through the semester. Democratizes leadership, makes it accessible to everyone. Okay, you notice these skills are not gender-based, they're not society-based, they're not all kinds of other descriptors based. Anyone can operate in these skill sets and put themselves on a path to a good leadership career. Its broader approach means it can apply to more situations, and then it's broadly generalizable. That's something you look for in research is, okay, so in the research says in this situation, what about everybody else? Can I take this little bit of correlation and apply that to lots of people? So this can be useful to people in lots of areas. All right. That's also, however, one of its criticisms. It's so broad that it may not even have anything to do with leadership specifically. Some areas of these two approaches and skills could apply to anyone in an organization, not just the leaders. So can be too broad for precise application, right? If I'm looking for a narrow, specific answer to a question, this is not going to help me get there. It might point me in the right direction, though. So it doesn't explain how strengths in the factors lead to high capacity leaders. It just shows correlation. Oftentimes in a study, they'll have a little section at the end that says further research suggested. So that perhaps that's where they left this, was like, hey, that's outside the scope of our study, but that would be interesting to know. So many of the components are too similar to the trait approach and not trainable. Perhaps as you've been reading through the chapter, you say, that sounds more like a trait than a skill. Well, some people say you're right. Okay. Since the skills model study only used Army officers, it could be limited in application to other organizations. So maybe it's not as broadly generalizable as some people would suggest. All right. Hey, let's talk about our project this week, the leadership instrument with the skills inventory, and also forgot to mention, I'm going to start leaving out the summaries, right? The summaries are in the book. You could read the summaries on your own. They're about a page and a half. I don't think I'd need to have those in these lectures. The lectures are long enough as it is. So let's briefly, since we're coming up on 30 minutes, talk about the leadership instrument skills inventory. So for your discussion post this week, I want you to read over how to do the leadership instrument. I want you to predict what category you're strongest and weakest in. And then I want you to take the skills inventory and score it. A little easier this week because it's just you. You don't have to rely on anybody else. So it's a little easier to get this done quickly. And then answer the questions in the weekly module assignment. Post your responses by 11:59 p.m. on Thursday. Your first responses. After the initial round, start that conversation with your peers. And then don't forget to tie in your questions and answers with direct and specific references to the text lecture. That's how I know that you're actually getting into your books. Okay, I'm going to start grading a little bit harder on that, looking less for opinions and more for your opinions backed up by what the text says. Okay, I'm going to start expecting a higher level of doing that. All right, that is the lecture. I will leave it there and bid you farewell until next week.